in terms of the motion put forward, there are very serious issues raised, and they require a very serious response. But that sort of response will obviously emerge through the day, so I'm not going to be forcing down any specific ideas. It's more about thinking aloud about how I reflect on practice, cities, my involvement, others' involvement in it, in teaching and both in teaching and in practice. So I did this drawing called the Education Time Machine, which is real. That machine is under pressure in terms of money, what it costs to study, the levels through which one progresses. And you've got external pressures in terms of Commonwealth accreditations, etc., all coming to bear on this thing. So you can see inside this box, there's very limited opportunity to actually engage beyond the confines of these courses, which are universal in many ways. I mean, it's on wheels, it's mobile, you can move between courses, you can complete one course in one university, move across, and in a way it's expected. But in the process, context is the thing that suffers. If one looks at knowledge, and you look at this map showing where knowledge is created, where books are published, it paints a pretty big picture. So that machine, that education machine is fed from the north, and it's very obvious from this. So the resources that we have within a university context and in the library is this. So, and we know that, but we tend to forget that reality in the way that we approach teaching and our engagement with the world. It's really all important. So it's a sausage machine with stuff coming in from the top and exiting from on the bottom. It seldom works the other way around. If one looks at the world and the urban populations, it reflects that map, where cities are on this drawing or this photograph, NASA photograph, reflects that accumulation of knowledge, where people sit in cities, where the institutions are there to print, to write, and the time for that sort of thing, the luxury for that, and the resources, then all is part of the context, becomes by default part of the context within which we teach. In terms of messy cities, that's not unique. If one looks at this drawing, Cedric Price drawing done in 1982, it shows that the city evolved from something pretty neat and defined in a time where religion and control was obvious, to a phase of expansion and the walls breaking literally, to the scrambled egg on the right. And that is not the South African city. So we must also not confuse the condition of our cities with it being absolutely all about South Africa. Globalization has caused that sort of fragmented pattern of disaggregated investment patterns, shopping malls. And so if one looks at a drawing like this, one can actually identify with this, although it's not produced locally. If one doubts that sort of scrambled egg thing, you can see it in Europe. You can see how things are not as clearly defined, and the city is not an artifact. It's not a single. It's not an object. It's a very complex sort of thing. And as Lynn said, after writing several books, it's beyond our comprehension. So to pretend that we understand cities is just fallacy. And big mistakes were made through people assuming that. Then urban design. What is urban design? Who designs, and what design skills are necessary to engage in this? Okay, then we have to talk about the architect. We're talking about urbanists. What is the relative position of the architect, the self-image of the architect, and the competence of the architect required? Okay, so one looks at this sort of machine, and what you get, it's quite possible to produce a master of the universe through that system, the so-called star architects. And that's what people aspire to. Those books that are produced in the north package that sort of vision. So the machine then produces these sort of things. People will have a very specific view of themselves, which has never been tested beyond those confines of the classroom, the very limited debate. And then the essence of urban design is really this. It's expanding that box, and that is the real challenge. And to expand that box, one must want to expand it. You must personally want to be involved in a process of expanding that box. And that is really a zone of reflection, of engagement and reflection. So if one looks at that internal box, I've been told often in trying to bring urban design thinking into an undergraduate urban architecture course, that it's difficult enough to design a building. It takes long enough to design a building, to stack the bricks, on top of each other and make it stand up. And we all know it. We've been there, we've built buildings. But then at some point, surely, one must start getting beyond, moving beyond that point. At what point is that overlap necessary? So you see this external box has more openings cut into it and overlaps with peripheral or associated, not peripheral, associated disciplines. People, planners, engineers, economists, etc. And that obviously takes time and skill. While I was studying in the UK, I was fortunate to study under people that were very supportive of reflective practice theory. And those theories are actually suspicious of theory. I mean, it's an irony. It's books that actually say books are rubbish and that we shouldn't be too concerned with books. So I did a very interesting PhD, I think, that's my view. I don't have a long bibliography at the back of my PhD. What I do have are many, many pictures of people and recordings of interviews, copies of business cards, etc. Because of this culture. So it's very difficult to make a living if one assumes that, and that's part of the problem. We architects see themselves as being professional, walking out of the architecture school with a degree, and then waiting for the salary offer to match. The reality in terms of the reward is much broader than that. So if one develops, you actually become bored with the narrow defining confines of architecture, and those other things should become of interest. What you also start to learn is that people differ. If you all agree within the AA or the Bartlett or UCT or Nelson Mandela University, you actually, there's a common agreement around a value system within that group often. It converges after a few years and people follow the best students. So that becomes the value system. We deal with situations in Africa where you've got this counterpoint between socialism and capitalism, and our role is not to be an activist sitting in either of those camps. As professionals, we need to acknowledge that both exist, and how do you mediate these two? That's the most difficult part. And a lot of the problems that Tim has raised is due to that. It's that sort of tension, which is very unique to South African conditions. Okay, now what do architects think of themselves? If you fill out, there's an experiment, fill out this thing, what do you get the students saying 2011 on the left, 2051 on the right. I want to become more modest. I'm arrogant now, I want to become more modest. It's politically correct sort of statement to make, but do we live that? Another guy is probably more honest, saying, it's the sky's the limit. 2051, I'll be doing these tall buildings versus low-cost housing, whatever. I mean, that sort of mindset of expanding the ego is the other way of looking at it. I'm sure I missed Luana's talk last night, but I'm sure that was part of it. Okay, now learning to juggle takes time. That's the other thing. It's not instant, and I think we live in a world of instant gratification. You log in, whatever, and it's all there. That learning curve doesn't stop at university. It's a big flaw, especially in our field of urbanism. In other fields, yes. If you've learned to count beans, that's what you do. You count beans. You do it probably better and worse, but in our field, this sort of thing of juggling becomes more and more complex. The drawing on the right is design seen from a distance. Now, those of us who've really lived design, and I think many of the people you have, will know that this is true, that you battle through a phase which clients don't see, authorities don't see, but it's real. It's swimming in treacle, that's right, it's really tough. Then at some point it starts becoming easier and you present and it all looks effortless. But the more effort you put up front, the more effortless it looks at the end, and the better the fit and all the things that are important. So effort, you can't actually discount. Okay, so breaking out of the box takes time and a willingness to learn, a continued willingness to learn. Okay, now back to this university studio or the crit room. You deal with people, as Tim has said, often fairly young, thinking their own thoughts, and the poor student thinking, what are they thinking? Because if I can get what they think, then maybe I can get a good mark. So this thing is a bit incestuous. It is a bit problematic, and it's one of the points that Tim raised. Your education is really determined by the level of influence or reflectiveness, I believe, of those people sitting there. If they are reflective enough, you will learn much more than when those people are dogmatic and have a very clear view of what architecture and the world should look like. Okay, so then we look at that panel and we say, let's transplant them. You know, if we look at building, that is still possible. Building as object or whatever. I know that we don't teach architecture like that anymore, but it's just a hyperbole. If you put people like that into this context, this is Lagos, what do they think? How will they respond? What will they say? How true will what they say be? Generally just be rubbish, we know that. So, in any case, that is the reality of the context in which we have to operate as professionals. Okay, then there's social justice, which is very strongly advanced at university. In a cynical way would be called political correctness. Okay, so social justice, whatever, and these terms are often used interchangeably. And marks are given, and then a line is drawn, and the student exits with a certain level of an understanding of complexity. So you see it goes from 1 to 2 to 3, and then you exit before you've really developed an appreciation of complexity. You haven't actually gone through those phases. I've actually reversed the process, because that process you can only see once you've lived design and integration and negotiation. So it's reversing that. So the student actually enters it from the other end, from the wrong side, really. As I said earlier, mediation. On the left-hand side, you get political correctness, social justice. On the right-hand side, you get invest and greed. And those tensions Tim also spoke about. We are, as designers, as servants of design, really, put into the dragon's den. Those of you know that program. So you sit in this den and you try to figure out what best suits your career, your health, and a number of other things, I suppose. But it's really about a willingness to learn and expand and engage at all those levels, because they all exist and they're all part of the context. Okay, so if one looks at this box, in the beginning, in the middle I've put social justice and political correctness, and on the fringes you start getting these other sort of evil forces, greed, invest, well, social justice as well, and so on. So you get to engage with other players. Now this is a fictional architect. I'm just putting him into the game. He's doing a presentation to people. Now who are those people? But it's fundamental because that architect's image, self-image, is built in this fashion in many practices. Okay, so you see, after being conditioned, this thing becomes a commodity, this thing that this architect sells. So he says, well, I think architecture, but I have to speak commodity because the people that buys this want to hear commodities, like you're selling an auto tower with buttons in the right places and these sorts of things. Nothing beyond it is really of great concern. I'm being a bit cynical here, but I'm just painting an extreme picture, but it's not that far removed from reality. So after doing this for several years, think commodity and speak commodity. So the value system has changed, because if you do it often enough, that's what works for you, and you change it. And we know big commercial practices are built on that model. That guy says I, but it's a whole team at the back also, the same party line has to be followed to make this thing work, to sell this commodity, this assembly line. And then that process is simplified by these people looking at it. They just see it as fun, because there's stuff up there which has gone potentially through all these layers of complexity and evolution and thought and negotiation. But what is presented is clean, it's on posters, it's there, and they think it's fun. And why not get 4 people to do that? So that's the risk work culture. The other aspect is what I call place entrepreneurs and non-place entrepreneurs. You sit in Port Elizabeth, but your clients don't sit in Port Elizabeth. They don't care about the legacy, they just care about the commodity. So, as I say, this person loves Port Elizabeth, loves the concept, the context, wants to build a better city, but the others don't give a damn. You have to manage that somehow, or we have to find a way of managing that. Okay, then there's the other bunch, Sapoa. They write rules that are universal, really. They write rules whether it's Joburg, Cape Town, Durban, and once again, I'm simplifying, and people know a lot more about this than I do, but I've also experienced it often enough to know that if you talk about AAA grade, it's a measurable from Sapoa, which is enforced in the inner city of Cape Town as much as it's on the periphery of another town elsewhere. So context doesn't actually come into play, so it's a tyranny. That is a tyranny, and it's something that we should challenge as architects or urbanists, people that understand urbanism can't accept those universal concepts. And then there's this sort of suggestion. This is Laurie Baker, worked in India, built over 2,000 buildings, and what he says is, what do you think? So that is a very different way of looking at design. And as I say, this is easy to talk about, very difficult to practice, to make a living, but there are people like that, and they were not well known, because they were discovered after doing these buildings over an extended period of time, engaging passionately in making things. Then life between buildings after they are built. We spoke about this process, going through, I put a question mark over the effort. Then there's the product, there's the hard sell, there's the buy, there's the construction, potentially there are awards, and then there's managing risk beyond that. There's no measurable around legacy, really, in the way that we look at things. I mean, that's the norm. And a lot of our cities built in this fashion. From housing to commercial buildings, it's actually 80 to 90% of built form is produced in this manner. Okay, so then I said earlier, then there's also competition, which makes architects feel, why should they put in the effort? If they're competing with 3 other guys, they're going to limit their risk up front and limit their risk at the end. So what gets squeezed out? Quality. We all know that. There's no time for quality to think about what you're doing and to engage, because you have to rush to get over these hurdles to make the thing work. Okay, then this guy has done this, as I said earlier, for so many times on the right-hand side, and in his mind says, I'm a top architect. And in the market, that person is called a top architect. Outside there, I've had it many times asking people, who do you think is the best? Well, I don't ask them, they tell me. And then those are the architects running big commercial practices, because they have that image of themselves. It's reinforced by the market. Very far away from quality. It's all about salesmanship. Okay, the guy on the left is the cynic. But maybe it's the guy that's actually put in the effort, became disillusioned, and just lost heart in the process. Okay, so then there's the next step. This guy then says, I'm also a top urbanist. And we see that in the work of somebody like Zaya did, who does buildings from the fire station. It goes bigger and bigger and bigger to stadium. Now she's designing cities, but they all just form. It's just rubbish, just thrown out. Form, and then they're just very sexy, and then people must love it. But they're not viable. Okay, but then, and there's a good example, Foster will justify the gherkin based on the wind motion. And apparently a normal building of normal form that supports street life and a grid pattern is bad. That guy is in harm's way with this normal building. The guy on the right-hand side is safe because the gherkin saves him. Imagine if all buildings were gherkins. Imagine what a mess. So there's no understanding or appreciation of background and foreground. It's just, as Fabio Todeschini says, a big whack. So. Okay, and then that form thing goes further. Now that's been justified based on that stupid wind study by the ego-driven architect, and then the game just carries on and on and on. Taller, smaller, fatter, thinner, and so on. With no regard of what happens at the ground level. Okay, then there's the tender box thing, and I'm not going to elaborate. I think architects know more about this, many in this room, and others will probably talk about this. There's undervalued research for meaning in that sort of condition, because that's not one of the evaluation criteria. So that is also a major problem. So we've got these compounded problems. How do we deal with this? Well, I think I've got a solution. It's maybe naive. I'm an urban designer. I'm a passionate urban designer. I believe urban design has value. If one can use frameworks to bring into the brief writing phase and enforce frameworks of quality and make them non-negotiable, only then do you start winning the battle. If you lay the ground rules at the right place in our cities, you start winning the battle, because you don't have to fight with the suburbs. You don't have to fight with the greed mongers. You don't have to. There's space for all these people, but the frameworks need to be sober. But you can't have cities without frameworks today. That's not the way cities are built. They're not built incrementally in a very small fashion. Also, I believe investment should be more focused. Development should be ring-fenced, that there's enough resourcing available to make these things work. Because what's happening post-apartheid, democracy in a way translates to giving everything to everybody at all times. That sort of mindset, you can't, because it's like spreading a can of paint too thinly to a point that you can't see it anymore. It becomes invisible. So we need to think about concentrating things about around existing energy, around stations in the townships, for instance. Consciously separate a station and a long-distance bus around, because there's a line of energy that you can draw on, build on, and it's real. It's not artificial. But without the framework, you can't do it. And if you leave it to engineers, they will solve it in a very different way. So urban design is fundamental to bring influence into the thing, not control, greater influence, understanding of background and foreground, and legacy over product. Critical mass, density. We haven't even started developing an appreciation of what density means and how exciting these things are. And with the critical mass of density, all the spin-offs that you get. In terms of sustainable practice, for me, that is the silver bullet of sustainable practice, is densification. But we, because of our New World legacy and immigration from rural areas, we want to build small farms into cities. We want to get that right too. You can't. That can't be compromised on. Density is a non-negotiable. If one looks at the right, Christopher Alexander, a city is not a tree. On the right-hand side, it's perhaps the way an engineer would look at a city. It's things that are hierarchical, you can unpack them, you can put them in sequence. But what Alexander said way back in 1965 is that it's really an overlapping condition. And you can only see the overlap if you engage. You can't see it from the outside. It's not a physical overlap, that's part of it. It's overlaps of various different things. Then the art, and it's an art which urban designers have, is to visualize. It's the art of the possible. It's the counterpoint to cynicism, to say, if this is a city, if this is a space, what can we do with a space which excites from developers, the normal guy on the street, in a way which is visually accessible? Because if we don't make these things visually accessible, they fail. And therefore, architects primarily need to go into urban design. People come from all sorts of backgrounds into urban design, from planning and from engineering and so on. But ultimately, architect urban designers have the profound skill to inspire change. Invest in space between buildings, you get the spin-offs in any case, or enhanced return. It's not something that we've invented in our studios. It's real, and the examples are there. So this document, which is on the internet, if you Google it, is very interesting. It uses case studies to prove that if you pay for these, and as they often say, it doesn't cost anything. The streets are there in any case, the buildings are in it, just the way you arrange it. Okay, this is almost done. A powergram of urban design. This also comes from the Oxford Brook School. Sue McGlynn, who's a South African. She grew up in Joburg. Has been teaching at Oxford Brooks for many years. She conceived of this powergram. It's very small, but I'll try to explain what it says. There's a column there to the left first is architects, and it says where your influence and control lies. If it's an open dot, it's influence, and if it's a more darker dot, it's responsibility, and if it's a dark dot, it's control. So it shows that control is not with the design professionals. We bit players in this game. But if you look at urban design, we've got influence over a much broader range of issues. It goes from the street pattern and the block pattern all the way to the scale of the city. So urban designers develop holistic ways of dealing with these things so that everything is nested in something greater. And that's really where the influence is. As I say, it's not power, but if you add all these influences up, it adds up to a level of power. Okay, so I've spoken about this. Just to summarize, if one goes through these cycles, so it's really about an increased understanding of complexity through different means. And this is my response really to the motion. Further education should be a desire that's nurtured at university. It should be part of reflective practice, teaching. The theory of reflective practice should be brought into university, and it's being done in quite a few universities at the moment that I know of, but not at our universities. And that's really getting practitioners in reflecting on their experiences without feeling embarrassed, sharing these things, because we get embarrassed very quickly because of our ego-driven education. It's just vested in us. So that is important. Then life experience, and it is true, people that have life experience are probably better teachers, and they can reflect and they can distill and integrate ideas, openness to learn and subjugation of ego, and then patronage for brief development in context, both public and private. Somebody has to pay for brief development. It's the R&D, the research and development that Tim spoke about. That, if anything comes out of today's session, that people pay for a document or a product or anything that you can take physically or hold, touch, people are prepared to pay for. But the search, they're not prepared to pay for. Because they see, well, we don't trust these guys, they all go and have a beer in the time that they'd be paying them to do this sort of thing, because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And our whole system works like that. It's very technical, rational, as Nabil Hamdi at Oxford Brook said. And that is very detrimental. And it's in a way to try and use resources more effectively. So it's put into little things that's easy to file, and we try to manage the cities in that way. And in fact, it's actually creating lasting damage. And then recognition and reward for the above, not for the building, but for the process. When we give awards, we should understand process. We should understand post-occupancy, extend it beyond the confines of that internal box. And then a charrette culture. I'll just skip this one because I've run out of time. The word charrette sounds like a fancy word. I've lived the charrette culture for quite a number of years now since returning from the UK. And I've tried to convince clients to pay for at least 8 weeks, if there's a fee-paying client, of charrettes. And you have 2-week cycles, and you get a manageable team together to talk about the issues at stake. It's amazing how much you learn. If you come there with your preconceived idea, and if you don't, this is the way architects do it. If you don't like this, I've got this. And if you don't like this, I've got that, and I've got this. It's like, that's the whole commodity thing. The charrette focuses you to say, I'm presenting things for the purpose of pulling it apart, discussing it, and yeah, as I say, it's a very different thing, and it's not part of our culture, of our design culture. It's very much part of design cultures everywhere else, not everywhere else, in a great deal of other places where they care about their cities. This was presented to engineers a while back, but they asked me to talk about street design, so that's why it's got that title. And just quickly, and I've showed this at my previous lecture at university, what a charrette really is. It's this sort of thing. It's the table and the issue and the appointment, I suppose. And there's the architect that usually would be there struggling with his own piece of paper or her own piece of paper, trying to get to the perfect design. But it's not that. People start joining in, they start discussing this thing, and this happens, as I said, in cycles. You come back, you reflect, and you move it forward. It's not you can probably call it a workshop if you want to, but it's not the sort of participation that we've been calling participation. Because you still have the other participation of people standing, like I do, in front of an audience, talking to people and becoming the subject. But this sort of prior investigations within a group to bring profoundness and essence to a problem is very fundamental and required. Okay, so it just goes to this process. And then, at the end, there is something that sits within that mess. But it's better than it would have been without these sorts of processes. But what I find amazing about the charrette is that if you say around this table, one person is a counsellor, one is a client, one is the architect, one is an engineer. Initially there are these tensions, but after the third or fourth charrette you start getting convergence and a level of pride around this thing that's developing, and people that have never actually been given insight into that have always been put in their offices, in their back rooms, get insight into that. And when you're done with this, anybody around that table can actually explain this process, both the process and the product that comes out of it. And it's as I say, it's something that should be paid for, because as I say, if it's not paid for, it's not going to happen. It's just a very simple thing. We know that's real. Okay, so I've tried to do this as best I can. I can never be complete, but thanks for that.